Elias Thorne pushed open the heavy oak door of his sprawling Seattle mansion with a weary hand, the leather briefcase slipping from his grasp and thudding softly against the polished marble floor of the foyer. It was earlier than usual for him to be home, far earlier, in fact having cut short a grueling board meeting where projections for the next quarter had been dissected like a cadaver under fluorescent lights. The city skyline outside the floor-to-ceiling windows still shimmered under the late afternoon sun, casting long golden shadows across the minimalist living room, with its sleek leather sofas and abstract sculptures that cost more than most people's homes. But Elias barely registered the opulence. His mind was a whirlwind of fragmented messages from his phone. The text from Jolene Hayes, the woman he'd hired 6 months ago to keep the house running, and his 5-year-old daughter, Aria, from unraveling in the wake of their shared loss, had been brief but alarming. Aria had a little accident, fell down the stairs while chasing the cat. It's not too bad, but I'm taking care of it. She's calm now. His heart had clenched like a fist at the words, visions of scraped knees and tear-streaked faces flooding his thoughts, propelling him through traffic like a man possessed. Sophia, his wife, had been gone just over a year now, taken by a relentless cancer that had hollowed her out before his eyes, leaving behind a void that echoed in every corner of this too-big house. Aria was all he had left of her, the wide blue eyes, the unruly curls that caught the light just so, and the idea of her hurt, even a little, was enough to make his pulse thunder in his ears. He moved through the house like a shadow, his polished loafers silent on the hardwood, drawn inexorably toward the kitchen where muffled voices and the faint clink of porcelain drifted out. The air grew warmer, laced with the earthy scent of fresh herbs and something faintly sweet, like honey warmed over a flame. Elias paused at the threshold, his breath catching as the scene unfolded before him, freezing him in place like a statue caught mid-stride. There, in the heart of the gleaming stainless steel kitchen that a celebrity chef had once envied, knelt Jolene Hayes, her dark curls tied back in a simple scarf, her hands gentle but deliberate as they tended to Aria. The little girl sat perched on the edge of the massive granite island, her small legs dangling, a makeshift bandage of soft cloth wrapped loosely around her right arm where a jagged cut from the stair rail gleamed red and angry beneath a glistening paste of crushed leaves and golden liquid. But it wasn't the injury that sent a chill racing down Elias's spine, it was what Jolene was doing. In one hand she held a small clay bowl filled with a verdant mixture, dabbing it onto the wound with the precision of an artist, while in the other she clutched a delicate necklace strung with polished seeds and tiny feathers that caught the light like whispers of wind through ancient trees. She was murmuring softly, her voice a rhythmic cadence that wove through the air like smoke from a sacred fire. Words Elias couldn't quite make out, but they carried the lilt of old Southern hymns, interspersed with phrases that sounded like pleas or invocations, her free hand tracing slow circles in the air above Aria's arm, as if drawing invisible threads of light to mend the tear in flesh and spirit alike. Aria, bless her, wasn't crying. Her tear-streaked face had softened into something resembling peace, her tiny fingers clutching the edge of Jolene's apron as she leaned into the touch, whispering back, "It tickles, Mimi. But the hurt's going away." Elias's world narrowed to a pinpoint of horror, his rational mind, the one that had built a tech empire from code and algorithms, screaming in protest. What was this? Some archaic ritual pulled from the shadows of forgotten folklore? His daughter, vulnerable and small, exposed to, what? Charms and chants in the middle of his modern kitchen? Panic surged through him like ice water, mingling with a deeper, uglier fear rooted in the stories he'd heard growing up in a conservative enclave, where whispers of other ways were laced with suspicion and scorn. He didn't think he reacted, lunging forward with a roar that shattered the fragile calm. "What in the world are you doing to her?" The words exploded from his chest, raw and jagged, echoing off the high ceilings as he swept Aria into his arms, cradling her against him like a shield. Her small body tensed in surprise, a whimper escaping her lips as the sudden movement jostled the wound. Jolene rose slowly, her movements unhurried despite the storm in his eyes, wiping her hands on the hem of her simple cotton dress, the one patterned with tiny wildflowers that Aria adored. Her face, usually warm with that quiet strength that had first drawn him to hire her, now held a flicker of something guarded, like a flame shielded from the wind. "Mr. Thorne," she said evenly, her voice steady as the roots of an old oak, "it's just a family remedy. The leaves are from the garden aloe and comfrey to soothe the swelling, mixed with honey to keep it clean. And the necklace. It's for comfort, to help her feel safe. My grandmother used it on me when I was little, after falls and fevers. It works alongside the medicine, not instead of it. But Elias wasn't hearing reason. He was drowning in the roar of his own assumptions, the protective fury that had simmered since Sophia's diagnosis, when he'd thrown money at doctors and trials and still lost her. A remedy? You call this a remedy? Smearing mud and waving trinkets over my child like some backwoods healer? This isn't your grandmother's cabin in the bayou. This is my home, my daughter. Call an ambulance right now, or better yet, get out. You're fired. Pack your things and go. Leave the keys with Harlan on your way. The words tumbled out harsher than he intended, laced with an edge he hadn't known he possessed, born of exhaustion and grief and a lifetime of barriers he'd built around his heart. Jolene's eyes widened fractionally, a shadow crossing her features, not anger, but a deep, weary hurt that made her shoulders sag just a touch. She reached out instinctively toward Arya, who was now burying her face in Elias's shirt, murmuring, "Mimi, don't leave." It was making it better. But Jolene pulled back, her hand hovering in the air like a leaf caught in an updraft, before dropping to her side. "I'm sorry you see it that way, sir," she replied softly, her tone measured, devoid of the defensiveness he half expected. "I only wanted to help her feel whole again, body and soul. The doctor can check it when he comes. I've already texted him the details." She gathered the scattered remnants of her kit, the bowl, the necklace, a small pouch of dried petals with quiet dignity, slipping them into her worn canvas bag. As she moved toward the door, Arya's cries grew sharper, little fists pounding against Elias's chest in protest. "Daddy, no! Mimi fixes everything." The kitchen fell silent after Jolene's footsteps faded down the hall. The only sound, the distant hum of the refrigerator and Arya's hiccuping sobs that twisted like knives in Elias's gut. He carried her to the living room, settling into the oversized armchair that still bore the faint imprint of Sophia's form from their last family movie night, and rocked her gently, murmuring apologies he wasn't sure were for her or himself. The wound on her arm, he noticed as he peeled back the cloth, was already less inflamed, the edges of the cut cleaner than he'd feared, a faint herbal scent rising like a promise kept. His phone buzzed the family physician, confirming he'd swing by in an hour, praising the initial treatment in his message for its natural antiseptics. Elias stared at the screen, a knot of unease tightening in his chest. Who was Jolene Hayes, really? He'd hired her on Harlan's recommendation, the longtime driver who'd known Sophia's family for decades. Jolene had arrived with references glowing like polished silver, a decade in childcare, a near-finished degree in holistic health from a community college down south, and eyes that held stories deeper than her resume suggested. She transformed Arya from a withdrawn shadow haunted by hospital visits and empty promises into a giggling whirlwind who chased fireflies in the backyard and demanded Mimi's stories at bedtime. Tales of clever foxes outwitting hunters, woven with lessons on kindness and resilience that made Elias's throat ache with envy, for he could barely string together a lullaby without stumbling. As the evening wore on, with the doctor applying stitches and antibiotics but nodding approvingly at the poultice's efficacy, Elias's mind replayed the scene in relentless loops. The way Jolene's hands had moved not with haste, but with reverence, as if each touch carried generations of knowledge passed down like heirlooms. He thought of his own childhood in a sterile suburb, where ailments were met with pills and prayers in white-steepled churches, no room for the earthy wisdom of roots and whispers. Sophia had been the bridge, her artist mother's tales of herbal gardens in Provence softening his edges. But even she might have paused at the feathers and chants. Yet Arya had trusted enough to let the fear ebb away. By midnight, with his daughter finally asleep in her canopy bed surrounded by stuffed animals Jolene had mended with tiny stitches of embroidery thread, Elias found himself in the study, the glow of his laptop casting harsh shadows on the walls, lined with awards for innovation and philanthropy. He typed her name into the search bar. Jolene Hayes. The results were sparse, a LinkedIn profile frozen in time from 3 years ago, listing her as a student aide in a wellness program, with a photo of her smiling amid a circle of women in a community garden, baskets overflowing with greens. There was a mention in a local newsletter about a scholarship she'd won for bridging traditional healing and modern care, and a faded obituary for her mother, gone too young to domestic accidents that hinted at darker undercurrents. Elias leaned back, rubbing his temples, the weight of his outburst settling like lead in his veins. Harlan had called earlier, his voice gravelly with disapproval. "She's a good soul, Mr. Thorne. Came up from Alabama after her family fell apart, lost her ma young, raised her younger siblings on grit and grace. That backwoods stuff you threw at her, it's the same heart that kept her going when the world tried to break her." Dawn crept in through the blinds, painting the room in soft grays, and Elias made his decision over black coffee that tasted like regret. He couldn't undo the words, but he could try to mend the rift they'd carved. Dressing in jeans and a simple sweater clothes Sophia used to tease him for hiding his corporate armor, he slipped into the garage, the engine of his understated SUV purring to life. The drive to East Side took him through neighborhoods he'd only glimpsed from boardroom windows. Modest bungalows with peeling paint and flower boxes bursting with defiant color. Children on bikes weaving through streets alive with the hum of everyday resilience. Harlan had given him the address reluctantly, adding, "Bring more than pride this time, sir. Bring humility." The house was a weathered craftsman, its porch sagging under the weight of potted herbs and wind chimes that tinkled like distant memories. Elias knocked, the sound hollow in the still morning air, and when the door creaked open, it was to the face of an elderly woman with Jolene's eyes sharp, assessing, framed by silver braids. "Mr. Thorne," she said without surprise, her voice carrying the same melodic drawl. "Jolene's in the back garden. But mind your step, she's not one for uninvited storms." He followed her through a living room cluttered with warmth. Shelves of dog-eared books on botany and folklore, framed photos of a younger Jolene in graduation cap beside a stern-faced woman who must have been her grandmother, and a quilt draped over the sofa, stitches telling stories in every square. The garden out back was a sanctuary of green rows of lavender and mint bordering a small fountain, bees humming in lazy arcs. Jolene knelt there, hands buried in soil as she transplanted seedlings, her back to him, the morning light haloing her form like a quiet benediction. She didn't turn immediately, but her shoulders stiffened, sensing his presence like a shift in the wind. "If you're here for the last paycheck, it's on the kitchen counter," she said finally, without looking up, her voice steady but threaded with steel. "Harlan dropped it off last night." Elias swallowed, stepping closer, the damp earth cool under his shoes. "I'm not here for that. I'm here because I was wrong, dead wrong, and I owe you more than money or words. Arya, she asked for you all night. And I saw the camera footage this morning. You didn't harm her. You healed her, in ways I couldn't even see. Please, Jolene, come back. Not as the help, but as family, if you let us be." She rose then, brushing dirt from her knees, turning to face him with eyes that held oceans of unspoken histories. Dirt streaked her cheek like war paint, and in her hand she held a sprig of comfrey, its leaves broad and forgiving. For a long moment she studied him, the rumpled clothes, the shadows under his eyes, the raw plea in his posture, and then, softly, "Family isn't built on apologies alone, Mr. Thorne. It's built on trust. If I come back, it's on my terms. Respect for my ways, space for my studies, and no more shadows of doubt. Arya deserves that. And so do I." Elias nodded, relief flooding him like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Agreed, all of it." As she handed him the sprig, "Plant this by her window. It'll remind her of strength." He felt the first fragile thread of connection weave between them, a promise that the darkness of misunderstanding might yet give way to something enduring. Back home, as Arya squealed in delight at the sight of Mimi returning with a basket of fresh-picked berries, Elias watched from the doorway, the house feeling less like a mausoleum and more like a hearth, warmed by the quiet magic of second chances. The day unfolded in small miracles. Jolene reapplying the poultice under the doctor's watchful eye, who marveled at its efficacy. Arya chattering about feather magic over lunch. And Elias, for the first time in months, lingering at the table, listening as Jolene wove a tale of a brave little sapling that bent but never broke in the storm. By evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the kitchen in amber, Elias found himself helping with dinner, chopping vegetables clumsily while Jolene guided his hand, her laughter light as birdsong. "See, even roots from different soils can grow together," she said, and in her eyes he glimpsed not just forgiveness but the dawn of possibility. That night, as Arya drifted off with the comfrey sprig clutched in her fist, Elias sat in the study once more, but this time sketching notes not for deals or deadlines, but for a future where healing came in many forms, and trust was the greatest medicine of all. The shadows of doubt lingered at the edges, but for now, they held no power. The light of understanding had begun to flicker, promising a path forward woven with patience, respect, and the unyielding strength of hearts brave enough to mend what was torn. Jolene Hayes stepped through the grand front door of the Thorne mansion for the second time that week, her canvas tote slung over one shoulder like an old friend, heavy with textbooks on emotional resilience and a small vial of lavender oil she'd pressed from her grandmother's garden clippings. The air inside carried the faint polish of lemon wood cleaner and the underlying warmth of fresh bread she'd baked the morning before her abrupt departure, a scent that lingered like an unspoken invitation. Elias waited in the sunlit foyer, not in his usual tailored suit but in a soft gray Henley that hugged his frame with uncharacteristic ease, his hands clasped loosely as if to steady himself against the vulnerability of the moment. On the console table beside him sat a steaming mug of chamomile tea, steeped just strong enough to chase away the chill of early autumn mornings, and beside it, a neatly folded enrollment packet from the local university's counseling program, its edges crisp and unmarked. "I wasn't sure how you take it, milk or honey?" he asked, his voice a gentle rumble that betrayed the hours he'd spent rehearsing this welcome, pacing the Persian rug until the fibers bore faint tracks of his unrest. Jolene paused, her dark eyes tracing the gesture, the way his fingers twitched slightly as if resisting the urge to over-explain. "Honey," she replied with a small, knowing smile that softened the lines of caution around her mouth. "But only if it's raw. Processed sweetness loses its soul." He nodded, relief flickering in his hazel gaze as he handed her the mug, their fingers brushing in a fleeting contact that sent a quiet spark through the space between them, not electric, but steady, like the first embers of a hearth fire kindled after a long winter. Arya's laughter echoed from the playroom down the hall before Jolene could even set her bag down, a cascade of pure joy that pulled them both toward the sound like a tide. The 5-year-old burst into view, her curls a wild halo around her face, clutching a half-finished drawing of a bird with feathers that spiraled into rainbows. "Mimi, you came back. Daddy said you were planting magic seeds, but I missed your stories." She launched herself at Jolene's legs, tiny arms wrapping around with the fierce grip of someone who'd tasted absence too soon. Jolene knelt swiftly, enveloping the girl in a hug that smelled of earth and comfort, her cheek pressing against Arya's temple as she whispered, "And I missed my little rainbow warrior. What if we finished that bird together today? She needs wings to fly over any storm." Elias watched from the doorway, his chest tightening at the ease of it the way Arya melted into Jolene's hold, the shadows of yesterday's fear dissolving like mist under sunlight. He'd spent the night before replaying the security footage again, not out of doubt this time, but wonder. Jolene's hands moving with the grace of someone who'd turned pain into purpose, her chants a lullaby disguised as healing. By dawn, he'd called the university dean, a contact from a long-ago charity gala, and secured a spot for her in the evening program. Full scholarship, no strings beyond the quiet hope that it might mend some of the fractures his words had wrought. Over the following days, the rhythm of the household shifted like sand settling after a wave, each moment a deliberate step toward something sturdier than fragile truce. Jolene arrived each morning at 8 sharp, not through the service entrance but the front, her presence announced by the soft chime of the brass knocker and the faint rustle of pages from her counseling texts peeking from her bag. Elias, who once devoured board reports over cold coffee in the pre-dawn hours, now lingered at the breakfast nook, pouring orange juice for Arya while stealing glances at Jolene as she arranged sliced apples into flower shapes on the child's plate. "You make ordinary things feel like art," he remarked one Tuesday, his fork pausing midway to his mouth as he watched her transform a simple meal into a canvas of delight. She glanced up, her laughter a low melody that danced in the morning light filtering through the bay windows. "Art's just seeing the beauty in what's already there, the curve of an apple, the way it catches the sundae. My grandmother taught me that. She said life's too short not to make every bite a memory." Their conversations unfolded in these quiet interstices, over steaming oatmeal laced with cinnamon from her family's recipe, or while folding laundry in the sun-drenched mudroom, where Arya's tiny socks tangled with Elias's monogrammed handkerchiefs like threads of two worlds intertwining. He learned of her roots in the rolling hills of Alabama, where her mother had tended a victory garden that fed neighbors through lean times, and how those same hands had trembled while mixing poultices to hide the bruises from a father's rages that echoed like thunder without rain. It wasn't always storms. Jolene shared one afternoon, her voice steady as she sorted Aria's crayons by hue. But when they came, Mama showed me how to root deep, draw strength from the soil, not the sky. That's why the herbs, the stories, they're anchors, not escapes. Elias found himself opening doors he'd bolted shut since Sophia's illness, the grief that had armored him now cracking under the weight of shared silences. One evening, as rain pattered against the conservatory windows like impatient fingers, he joined Jolene and Aria in a fort of blankets and fairy lights, the air thick with the scent of ginger tea and damp earth from the potted ferns nearby. Aria, tucked between them with her favorite stuffed owl, demanded a tale of the brave explorer who finds hidden treasures in the garden. Jolene spun the yarn with flair, the explorer discovering a chest of glowing stones that whispered secrets of courage, but as the story wove on, Elias's thoughts drifted to the chest he'd buried in his own heart, the late nights in hospital corridors, Sophia's hand growing frail in his, her final whisper of "take care of our light," Elias Aria's, the spark that outshines us all. When Aria dozed off mid-climax, her breaths even and soft, Jolene draped a quilt over her gently, then turned to him in the dim glow. "You carry it heavy, don't you? The weight of what was lost?" He met her gaze, the words spilling unbidden. Sophia. She was the dreamer, the one who saw magic in code and chaos. I built the empire to give her the world, but it couldn't give her time. Now Aria looks at me like I'm supposed to know how to fill the empty spaces, and half the time, I feel like I'm just echoing her laughter to keep the quiet at bay. Jolene listened without interruption, her presence a balm that invited the ache without judgment, and when he fell silent, she placed a hand on his knee, not intrusive, but affirming, like a root seeking soil. "Grief isn't a room to empty, it's a garden to tend. You don't replace the blooms that fade, you plant beside them. Let new growth honor the old." Aria sees that in you already. That's why she reaches for your hand in the stories. These exchanges built bridges across chasms he hadn't named, but not without the occasional tremor of the world beyond their walls. A crisp Saturday brought Elias's old circle from the venture capital firm, polished men in cashmere sweaters and their wives, with pearls that gleamed like judgments, to the house for an impromptu brunch, ostensibly to discuss a potential investment, but laced with the undercurrent of curiosity about the new arrangement. They arrived in a convoy of gleaming SUVs, filling the dining room with the clink of silverware and laughter that rang a touch too bright. Jolene moved among them with quiet efficiency, refilling water glasses and offering platters of her rosemary focaccia, her smile polite but her eyes alert, reading the room like a map of hidden currents. It was Marcus Hale, a silver-haired partner with a penchant for vintage scotch, who let the first barb slip over mimosas. "Elias, old man, you've gone full rustic renaissance here, herbal teas and all. Charming, really, but does it come with a waiver for unconventional methods?" The table stilled, forks hovering, as his wife tittered behind a napkin. Elias felt the heat rise, not in anger but in a fierce protectiveness that surprised even him. He set his glass down with deliberate calm, his voice level but edged with steel. "Unconventional? Marcus, the only convention worth keeping is the one that values heart over pedigree. Jolene's not just keeping this house, she's rebuilding it, one steady hand at a time. If that's too rustic for your tastes, there's the door." The room thawed awkwardly after that, conversations veering to safer shores like stock tips and yacht charters. But as the guests departed with air kisses and promises of follow-ups, Jolene lingered in the kitchen, scrubbing a pot with more force than necessary. "You didn't have to defend me like that," she said quietly when he entered, suds bubbling up to her elbows. "I can handle whispers. I've navigated boardrooms of silence my whole life." Elias leaned against the counter, watching the water swirl. "Maybe I didn't do it for you, at least, not just for you. I did it because Aria deserves a world where her Mimi isn't diminished to small talk. And because I've started seeing the world through your eyes, Jolene. It's sharper, kinder. I don't want to go back to blurred lines." In the weeks that followed, that clarity deepened through the small, sacred routines that stitched their days together. Jolene's evenings now split between Arya's bedtime rituals, reading from illustrated books of folktales where heroines outwitted dragons with wit and wildflowers, and her online counseling seminars, her laptop glowing in the quiet alcove off the library that Elias had cleared just for her, stocking it with an ergonomic chair and a diffuser humming with eucalyptus. He'd catch glimpses of her there, brow furrowed in concentration as she typed notes on trauma recovery, and one night, emboldened by a glass of Cabernet shared over leftover focaccia, he knocked softly on the doorframe. "Mind a sounding board? I've got a proposition, not business. Promise." She gestured him in, closing her laptop with a click that echoed like permission granted. Over the next hour, he outlined a vision. A quiet fund from his personal holdings, seeded with enough to launch a pilot program for community wellness workshops, blending her holistic approaches with licensed therapy sessions for families navigating loss. Not charity, he emphasized, leaning forward with the earnestness of a man rediscovering purpose, partnership. Your knowledge, my resources together, we could touch lives that look a lot like ours. Jolene's eyes lit with a fire he'd only glimpsed in her stories, tempered by the practical edge of someone who'd balanced dreams on a tightrope. "It's beautiful, Elias, but it'll take more than money, trust from the ground up, people willing to show up raw. I've seen programs fizzle because they forgot the faces behind the funding." He nodded, undeterred. "Then let's start small. Your first workshop here, in the garden house. Invite who you trust. Arya can be the mascot, handing out seed packets for growing strong hearts." The workshop came together like a mosaic of their shared vulnerabilities, held on a sun-dappled Sunday when the air hummed with the buzz of honeybees and the distant laughter of children from the neighborhood park. Jolene led a circle of 8 women from her old support group. A few neighbors Harlan had quietly vouched for, seated on cushions amid pots of blooming chamomile, guiding them through breathwork that unraveled knots of unspoken sorrow. Elias hovered at the edges, ostensibly tending the outdoor grill for a post-session picnic, but really absorbing the rhythm. The way voices trembled, then steadied, sharing fragments of fractured pasts, a mother's illness, a partner's abandonment, the quiet erosion of self under endless demands. When one participant, a soft-spoken librarian with shadows under her eyes, confessed to nights where grief felt like drowning, Jolene knelt beside her, pressing a smooth river stone into her palm. "Hold this when the waves come," she murmured. "It's from a creek that carved canyons, proof that even water yields to time." Elias, witnessing from afar, felt a pull in his chest, the echo of his own unspoken nights in Sofia. And later, as the group dispersed with lighter steps and recipes exchanged like treasures, he found Jolene by the fountain, splashing water on her face. "You gave them more than tools today, you gave them permission," he said, offering a towel warmed by the sun. She accepted it, their hands lingering this time, the air between them thick with the unspoken evolution from employer to confidant, from survivor to ally. "And you gave me the space to do it," she replied, her gaze holding his with a depth that mirrored the well of the fountain. "That's the real gift," Elias, seeing someone's roots and choosing to water them anyway. As autumn leaves turned the garden into a tapestry of crimson and gold, their bond wove tighter through trials that tested its weave. A fever swept through Arya mid-October, not grave but insistent, turning the vivacious child into a listless bundle who clung to Jolene like a lifeline. Elias cancelled a cross-country flight for investor pitches, pacing the nursery with thermometers and tepid baths, his worry manifesting in clipped calls to specialists. Jolene, drawing from her arsenal of gentle arts, brewed teas of elderflower and yarrow, singing low cradle songs from her childhood that coaxed sleep from fevered limbs. In the quiet hours when Arya finally rested, they sat vigil in rocking chairs by the window, the room bathed in moonlight that silvered the edges of worry. "I hate this helplessness," Elias admitted, his voice rough as gravel, elbows on knees as he stared at the floor. "Money buys the best care, but it can't buy the calm you bring her, the way she breathes easier just hearing your voice." Jolene reached across the space, her hand covering his in a gesture born of instinct, warm and unyielding. "It's not helplessness. It's presence. My mama used to say fever's the body's way of burning out the old to make room for new. Same with us. We sit with it, we honor it, and we emerge wiser." In that touch, something shifted irrevocably, the alliance deepening into affection, tentative as the first frost but promising warmth against the coming chill. Harlan, ever the quiet oracle, noticed a change during his weekly drives, his eyes crinkling in the rear view as he ferried them to a harvest festival on the outskirts of town. "Y'all move like roots finding each other underground," he observed over apple cider at a rustic stall, Arya darting between hay bales with a pumpkin under each arm. Elias chuckled, a sound freer than it had been in years, while Jolene blushed faintly, tucking a curl behind her ear. Roots take time to entwine, Harlan rushing snaps them. But the entangling continued. Shared sunsets on the back patio where Elias grilled salmon to her specifications wild-caught, seasoned with dill from the herb bed, while she recounted dreams of scaling her workshops into retreats where women could reclaim narratives stolen by circumstance. He countered with sketches of endowments and venues, his tech-savvy mind-mapping apps for virtual support circles that bridged distances like the ones she'd crossed from Alabama. One crisp evening, as stars pricked the velvet sky and Arya's giggles faded from her bath-time splash war, Elias poured them elderberry wine by the fire pit, the flames dancing reflections in their glasses. "You've changed this place, Jolene, not just the routines, but the soul of it. I came home to echoes. Now it's harmonies." She sipped slowly, her profile gilded by firelight, and turned to him with eyes that held galaxies of guarded hope. "And you've given me ground to stand on," Elias solid, without the sinkholes of expectation. "That's rare." Their shoulders brushed as they leaned back, the silence companionable, laced with the promise of tomorrows where trust bloomed not despite the scars, but because of them. Yet growth invited the winds of doubt, subtle gusts from the periphery that rustled the leaves of their fragile peace. An email from Elias's sister, Lydia, arrived midweek, forwarded from a family holiday planning thread with a veiled concern. "Darling, the photos from the festival are lovely, but who's the woman with Arya? She seems devoted. But we worry about influences after Sophia." Elias deleted it unread by Jolene, but the seed burrowed, sprouting unease during a rare evening out at a charity auction where benefactors eyed her with polite detachment, their compliments on her dress, a flowing midi and emerald silk she'd sewn herself tinged with questions about her background. "Community organizer?" One dowager probed over caviar canapes, her pearls clacking like judgment. Jolene met it with grace, steering to tales of her workshop's impact. "More like bridge, builder connecting hearts that systems try to isolate." Elias, overhearing, excused them early, the drive home filled with his apologies tumbling like autumn leaves. "They're relics of a world I outgrew, but it doesn't make it sting less." She placed a hand on his thigh as he navigated the rain-slicked roads, her touch a steadying force. "Stings are teachers, Elias, they show us where the armor's thin, but under it, we're all just trying to belong." That night, as they tucked Arya in together, Jolene reading the explorer's triumphant return, Elias adding ad-lib twists of tech gadgets for the heroine's arsenal, their laughter mingled, a duet that drowned out the distant thunder of old doubts. By month's end, the threads of connection had woven a tapestry resilient enough to weather the first real gale. Jolene's program, demanding a capstone presentation on integrating cultural healing practices into modern therapy, a daunting oral defense before a panel of academics who favored data over intuition. Nerves frayed her edges, manifesting in quiet moments where she'd stare at her notes, pen idle. Elias noticed, clearing his calendar for a rehearsal in the library, transforming the space into a mock auditorium with Arya as the enthusiastic audience of one, applauding wildly after each run-through. "You're not performing for them," he coached during a break, handing her a mug of fortifying nettle tea. "You're sharing your light, let it illuminate, not conform." Her presentation day dawned foggy, but she returned triumphant, the panel's praise innovative, empathetic, a vital voice echoing in her recounting over celebratory tiramisu. "They saw it. Elias, the bridge I want to build, and you helped me cross the first plank." In the glow of that victory, as Arya smeared cream on her nose and declared it magic frosting, Elias raised his glass, his eyes locking with Jolene's over the candlelight. "To bridges," he toasted, "and the hands that hold them steady." She clinked hers against his, the crystal singing softly, and in that chime, he heard the future unfolding not as a blueprint, but as a living vine, curling toward the sun with patient, unyielding grace. The chapter of reconnection closed not with fanfare, but with the quiet certainty that what began in misunderstanding had blossomed into mutual regard, a foundation laid with care for whatever gardens might yet grow. The grand unveiling of the Thorn-Hayes Resilience Fund unfolded not in the sterile glow of a corporate ballroom, but in the sun-warmed embrace of a repurposed community center on Seattle's vibrant Central District, where murals of blooming lotuses climbed the walls like declarations of rebirth, and the air hummed with the chatter of women who'd traveled from as far as Tacoma for the occasion. It was a crisp spring morning in 2026, the kind where cherry blossoms drifted like confetti from the trees outside. And inside, folding chairs formed a semicircle around a low stage draped in fabrics woven by local artisans, deep indigos and terracottas that echoed the earth tones of Jolene's ancestral quilts. Elias stood at the podium first, his once rigid posture now softened by months of shared sunrises and whispered strategies, his voice carrying the steady timbre of a man who'd learned to speak from the heart rather than the headline. "This fund isn't born from boardroom blueprints or balance sheets alone," he began, his gaze sweeping the room to meet eyes that held stories of quiet endurance, the single mother clutching her toddler's hand, the elder with silver-streaked braids nodding in solemn recognition. "It's forged in the fires of real lives, the kind that teach us resilience isn't a buzzword but a lifeline. Jolene Hayes showed me that, and together, we're extending it to every woman ready to claim her strength." He stepped aside with a gesture that felt like passing a torch, his hand briefly grazing hers in a touch that spoke volumes to those who knew to look for the subtle languages of partnership. Jolene ascended the steps with the grace of someone who'd walked through tempests and emerged with roots deeper for the weathering, her simple sheath dress in sunflower yellow swaying like a banner of unapologetic hope. She didn't clutch notes. Instead, she held a small, polished riverstone, the same kind she distributed in her early workshops, turning it over in her palm as she addressed the gathering. "Resilience isn't about never falling, it's about rising with the wisdom of every scar," she said, her voice a rich alto that filled the space without amplification, drawing people forward in their seats. "I stand here not as a symbol, but as a sister raised on the porches of Alabama where mamas mended more than hems. They stitched souls back together after storms that shook the foundations. This fund is our porch now. Safe harbors with counseling circles that blend heart-centered practices and professional guidance, skill-building studios where you learn to craft not just resumes but reclaimed narratives, and emergency grants that say, 'Your tomorrow starts today, no questions asked.'" The room erupted in applause that built like a wave, hands clapping in rhythms that echoed gospel calls and responses. Women rising to their feet with tears carving clean paths down cheeks hardened by too many unkept promises. Among them was Lena, a young artist from the district who'd attended Jolene's first garden workshop, now volunteering as the fund's outreach coordinator, her sketchpad filled with designs for the center's welcoming signs. Intertwined vines spelling roots and wings. The fund's launch propelled them into a whirlwind of expansion that tested the metal of their vision like wind-sculpting dunes. Initial seed money from Elias's discrete allocations channeled through a network of ethical investors he'd cultivated over late-night strategy sessions with Jolene funded the first satellite location in a leased storefront on a bustling avenue, its windows soon papered with flyers for free yoga flows infused with breathwork drawn from Jolene's cultural tapestry. She threw herself into the programming with the fervor of a gardener tending a long-awaited harvest. Mornings leading peer circles where participants shared not just burdens but blueprints for boundaries. Afternoons collaborating with therapists on hybrid models that honored intuitive healing without dismissing evidence-based tools. Elias, leveraging his tech legacy, developed a secure app for virtual check-ins, discrete checkmarks for "I've eaten today" or "I spoke my truth" that connected users across miles, its back-end anonymized to protect the fragile blooms of trust. "It's not surveillance," he explained during a donor briefing in his home office, now cluttered with mood boards and herb-drying racks alongside spreadsheets. "It's solidarity, a digital porch light for those navigating the dark." Their partnership hummed with synergy, her narratives grounding his innovations, his reach amplifying her whispers into widespread waves. By summer's end, enrollment swelled to over 200, with testimonials pouring in like rain after drought, stories of women securing apprenticeships in floral design or launching online journals that wove poetry from pain. Yet no light shines without casting shadows, and the fund's ascent drew the ire of those wedded to the status quo, their resistance manifesting first as veiled editorials in society, glossies that painted Jolene as an unlikely figurehead and Elias as a reformed tycoon chasing redemption. The real gale arrived in autumn. courtesy of Reginald Voss, a silver-tongued real estate magnate and former ally in Elias's venture circles, whose sprawling developments had long profited from displacing the very communities the fund sought to uplift. Voss, slighted by Elias's withdrawal from a lucrative high-rise project in favor of affordable housing grants, filed a blistering countersuit alleging negligent fiduciary oversight and undue personal entanglement, dredging up doctored emails implying conflicts of interest that twisted their private collaborations into something tawdry. The local press feasted, headlines blaring tech titans' folly, charity or cover-up, splashed across feeds, while online forums buzzed with speculation that ranged from envious to outright venomous, questioning Jolene's credentials with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Who does she think she is, playing savior in spaces she wasn't invited to? One anonymous post sneered, the words landing like barbs in Jolene's inbox, forwarded by a well-meaning volunteer. The onslaught hit during a pivotal retreat weekend at a wooded lakeside venue the fund had rented for immersive wellness sessions, cabins ringed by evergreens, where women hiked trails lined with affirmation stones and gathered around bonfires to voice intentions into the night sky. Jolene was midway through facilitating a sound bath, crystal bowls humming vibrations that coaxed tension from taut shoulders, when her phone vibrated insistently in her pocket, Harlan's gravelly voice on the line. "It's bad, Miss Hayes. Voss's team leaked documents to the Times. They're calling for an audit, saying the fund's a front for, well, you and Mr. 2040 says, Thorne's personal interests." She stepped outside, the forest's hush amplifying the knot in her throat, leaves crunching underfoot as she paced a path worn by generations of seekers. Elias arrived by helicopter an hour later, his face etched with a fury tempered by resolve, sweeping her into an alcove where the scent of pine mingled with the faint lavender from her diffuser necklace. "This isn't about us, it's about control, about keeping gates locked on who gets to heal," he growled, pulling up the article on his tablet, its pixels blurring under his thumb. Jolene leaned against a cedar post, drawing deep breaths that steadied her like anchors in a swell. "Then we don't defend, we define. Let them audit, our books are clean as the streams here, but we turn this into testimony. Invite the skeptics to a session. Show them the faces, not the figures." By evening, as participants drummed rhythms on handcrafted frames around the fire, she shared the news not as crisis but catalyst, her voice weaving through the crackle of flames. "Storms don't just test roots, they deepen them. Tomorrow, we craft our response not in courtrooms, but in community. Letters to editors that tell our truths. Social shares that spotlight our successes." The circle responded with a chorus of affirmations, hands linking in a chain that pulsed with collective power, one woman rising to declare, "If they come for one, they come for us all, but we've got the numbers now." The counteroffensive unfolded with the precision of a well-rehearsed symphony, Elias marshalling his legal eagles, fierce advocates from firms specializing in equity litigation, while Jolene orchestrated the narrative front, enlisting alumni from her workshops to pen op-eds that flooded inboxes and timeline. From poultice to powerhouse, How One Woman's Wisdom Uplifts Hundreds ran in a progressive outlet, penned by Lena, whose artwork now graced the fund's website with portraits of participants mid-transformation, eyes alight, postures unbowed. Elias took to podcasts and panels usually reserved for fintech disruptors, his pitch shifting from profit margins to human metrics. "I've built empires on data. Now I'm investing in dignity, because the real ROI is lives reclaimed." Voss's suit crumbled under scrutiny, his own ledgers revealing tax dodges and evictions that painted him as the true opportunist, leading to a swift dismissal and a quiet settlement that funneled reparations into the fund's coffers. The backlash, far from fracturing their momentum, fueled it. Donations tripled, with high-profile endorsements from authors and activists who'd followed Jolene's journey from whispered workshops to widespread waves. By winter, the fund broke ground on its flagship center, a sunlit haven in the district with therapy rooms overlooking a rooftop garden, where women could harvest their own herbs for teas that soothe both body and spirit. Jolene's star, once a steady glow, now blazed across horizons she hadn't charted, invitations cascading like autumn leaves. Keynotes at women's leadership summits in Portland, where she unpacked healing as heritage, to packed halls of emerging voices. Virtual firesides with global networks, translating her frameworks for audiences in Nairobi and New Orleans, where parallels in colonial scars sparked cross-continental collaborations. Elias traveled beside her when circuits allowed, his presence a quiet bulwark holding her coat during sound checks, fielding logistics so she could immerse in prep, and later, in hotel suites overlooking unfamiliar skylines, sharing debriefs over room service charcuterie that devolved into dreams deferred no longer. "You were made for this," he'd murmur after a particularly electric talk, his fingers tracing the lines of her palm as if mapping constellations. Not the stage, the shift you ignite. Their evenings wove intimacy with inspiration. Post-event walks through city parks where they'd collect fallen pods or petals for her apothecary experiments, in conversations meandering from policy pivots to personal pivots, like the night in a Vancouver drizzle when she confessed a long-held ache for formal ordination as a community healer, blending her lineage with accredited rites. "It's not about titles," she said, rain beating on her lashes like jewels, "but about honoring the circle elders before, sisters beside." Elias, ever the architect, connected her to a consortium of indigenous wellness leaders, their joint retreat birthing a certification pathway that rippled through the fund's curriculum. Arya, now a spirited 7-year-old with knees perpetually scuffed from tree-climbing adventures, became the fund's unofficial ambassador, her crayon manifestos "Strong Hearts Grow Tall" adorning newsletters and tote bags handed out at enrollment fairs. She tagged along to ribbon cuttings, her small hand in Jolene's as they snipped silk cords, declaring to wide-eyed enrollees, "Mimi says every seed starts small, but look at our garden." The child's growth mirrored the organization's, from shy recitals of gratitude circles to leading mini-sessions on kindness composting, where kids turned compost doubts into affirmations. Elias marveled at it during family game nights, now a staple with board games infused with strategy twists from Jolene's tales, watching Arya negotiate alliances with the ferocity of a budding diplomat. "You've given her more than stability," he told Jolene one twilight, as they pushed her on a backyard swing set he'd assembled with Harlan's gruff guidance, the creak of chains syncing with their synced breaths. "You've given her sovereignty, the tools to author her own story." She caught the swing mid-arc, steadying it with a palm, and turned to him, the fading light etching gold in her eyes. "And you've given us the canvas," Elias vast, unafraid. "But it's the colors we mix together that make it sing." As the fund's footprint stretched satellites sprouting in Oakland and Birmingham, virtual hubs linking diaspora dreams, their personal tapestry reached its most vivid weave during a spring equinox gathering at the lakeside retreat. Now a cornerstone property deeded in the fund's name. Under a canopy of stars that pierced the post-sunset haze like promises kept, participants formed a spiral dance, drums pulsing a heartbeat that echoed ancestral calls, Jolene at the center guiding movements that released what no longer served. Elias watched from the periphery, heart swelling at the sight of her arms outstretched, laughter free as the wind until she beckoned him in, her hand finding his amid the throng. They moved together, steps syncing without rehearsal, the circle's energy a vortex of validation that swept away the last vestiges of old hesitations. Later, by the water's edge where loons called into the night, he dropped to one knee on the dew-kissed grass, a velvet box open to reveal a ring forged from recycled gold, its band etched with intertwined vines and a central stone the hue of deep earth after rain. "Jolene Hayes, you've been my anchor, my architect, my awakening from that frozen moment in the kitchen to this boundless now," he said, voice thick with the weight of journeys shared. "Will you build forever with me, not as partners in purpose alone, but in the poetry of us?" Tears traced silver paths down her cheeks, but her smile rivaled the moon's glow as she extended her hand. "Yes, Elias, 1,000 times yes. Because forever isn't a place. It's the path we pave, hand in hand, for each other and all who follow." The wedding, held the following harvest moon at the Central District Center, now thriving with laughter echoing from its halls, wove their worlds into one seamless cloth. Harlan officiating with anecdotes that drew chuckles from the eclectic assembly of tech innovators, southern kin with braided crowns, and fund families bearing garlands of wildflowers. Arya, flower girl in a dress of layered petals, scattered seeds instead of blooms, whispering, "For new beginnings." Vows exchanged under an arch of living branches promised not perfection but perseverance. To tend the gardens of our days, through bloom and bramble, Elias pledged, while Jolene countered, to honor the soil of our stories, nurturing growth in every season. The reception spilled into the streets, A block party of food trucks serving fusion feasts, colored green wraps with techie twists like quinoa-infused cornbread music from a brass band blending brass with beats, and testimonials that flowed like toasts to tomorrow. By year's end, the fund had transcended borders, its model license for adaptations in Toronto and Johannesburg. Annual reports tallying not just metrics but miracles, women matriculating in trades, children thriving in after-school sanctuaries, circles expanding to include elders sharing oral histories that fortified the young. Arya, enrolled in a bilingual arts academy, penned her first published poem, Roots in the Sky, dedicated to Mimi and Daddy, who taught me wings are grown from ground. Elias and Jolene, honeymooning in a coastal cabin where waves whispered approvals, watched sunrises from a shared hammock, her head on his shoulder as they plotted the next horizon. A global summit on equitable healing, invitations already en route. We started with a cut and a chant, she murmured, fingers laced with his, and look what harmony we've hummed. He kissed her temple, the world beyond their embrace alight with the justice they'd sown, proof that from shadowed thresholds, light could cascade, illuminating paths for legions yet to walk. In the quiet dawn, with the sea's rhythm underscoring their breaths, they rose as one, ready to author the next verse of a legacy etched not in stone, but in the living pulse of lives lifted, loved, and forever changed.